Hello and good evening all. Since Ferrari has won Le Mans for the second time on the trot, it seemed like an appropriate time to talk about this funky-looking Frenchie, the Panhard Dyna Monopole X86. And no, there's no relevance between those two cars. Don't go looking for any, although if you do find some, I would love to know, because there's not very much information about the Dyna Monopole X86 online, and I'd be fascinated to hear whatever someone was able to come up with, even if it's determined by, casting the augurs or something. Anyway, in the years following the establishment of the 24 Hours of Le Mans, the French had largely been outstripped at their country's premier motorsports event, with the Brits and Italians coming to regard the Sarthoise countryside as a convenient, neutral, and relatively equidistant meeting point for settling their differences of engineering opinion in much the same way the various German and Russian states had treated Poland for the previous centuries, and were preparing to do again. While the effects of the Great Depression saw something of a de-escalation of tensions and budgets for the big foreign teams, inversely proportional to geopolitical tensions, this also set the French up to be increasingly focused on winning the smaller engined classes and the index of performance in the post-war environment, as their entrants were more commonly derived from mass-produced people's cars and competed on relatively shoestring budgets, gambling their chances of winning on a combination of aerodynamics, reliability, and efficiency rather than speed and power. One of the three manufacturers that achieved prominence in this role in the late 40s and 1950s was Panhard. Pivoting from their pre-war focus on large luxury vehicles, they started to manufacture small, lightweight cars primarily built from aluminum, as steel was rationed in the country to ensure a controlled, orderly resumption of the peacetime economy, and thus Panhard used design principles originally promulgated by a 1943 concept car designed by a Monsieur Jean-Albert Grégoire, whose concept nonetheless failed to attract any manufacturer interest at the time, not that there was anything else going on in 1943. This debut timing does represent the second most inappropriate timing for the debut of an otherwise interesting and/or innovative product, following the admittedly inaccurate timing claimed on the A1 steak sauce label, which implies that it was developed in the midst of the Civil War. The Grégoire design was used as the base inspiration for Panhard's Dyna series of vehicles, of which we are most concerned with the Dyna X. Might be Dyna 10. Although no, then they did like a Y and a Z, so Dyna X. The X was an itty-bitty vehicle, with models averaging just shy of 600 kilos all up, and powered by an air-cooled, horizontally opposed engine that ranged from just over 0.6 of a liter to just over 0.85 of a liter, depending on the sub-variant, all of which drove the front wheels through a 4-speed manual gearbox. Really, it doesn't get more French than that. A motorcycle engine, front-wheel drive, and itty-bitty. The Dyna X never really made a sufficient mark on the commercial market, as it struggled against similarly powered offerings from Citroën and Renault. There were about 47,000 of the Dyna X models built versus just north of 1.1 million for the Renault 4CV, and nearly 10 million built for the Citroën 2CV over their respective models' lifetimes. Nevertheless, several Dyna X models made appearances in motorsport, largely rebodied versions entered by either Deutsche Bonnet or Monopole, who were the manufacturers of this particular, well, at about 40 horsepower from a 745cc engine. I can hardly call it a beastie, but this highly efficient Squib. It was based on an X86, which was sold as the Dyna 120 for its top speed in kilometers an hour when conventionally bodied. A wide variety of Panhard rebodies were entered at Le Mans through the 50s and early 60s, and frequently performed well in class and for the index of performance, thanks to, again, their aerodynamic designs and frugal engines. While DB, Deutsche Bonnet, had enjoyed the factory's primary support as a full race partner in the early 50s, the 55 Le Mans disaster prompted Panhard as a manufacturer to take a step back from participation and provide somewhat more tacit support for Monopole instead, with their developments typified by cars such as this, the Monopole X86. Built by Monopole, who were a French coach builder and OEM, they had previous experience competing with small displacement endurance racers. This X86 was developed using a modified version of the road car's tube frame chassis, and similarly retained a slightly uprated version of the Louis Delgarde-designed Boxer Twin. The fundamental modification to make it race suitable was in the replacement of the rather dowdy stock body with a low-slung fastback coupe body, streamlined and gull-winged, and wearing a rather fetching French blue color on both wheels and body. Debuting in 1995, yes, no, that's when I debuted. Debuting in 1955, despite the fact that Panhard had moved on from the Dyna X model by that time, several Monopole X86s were built and campaigned by both the Monopole factory and private teams. Generally speaking, however, the X86 never managed to produce the successes of some of Monopole's other cars, such as the X88 and 89, with most race results ending as DNFs, and apart from a class win at the 57 12 Hours of Reims, the X86's most notable race entry unfortunately ended in tragedy. The 1956 Le Mans 24 Hours took place with a somewhat muted atmosphere, perhaps understandably after the horrible accident of the prior year, and the weather provided a suitably somber light drizzle for the start of the race. The first laps were replete with crashes from most of the field, particularly the front-runners, whose powerful Jags and Ferraris were really struggling to get their power down in the slippery conditions. But the smaller engined cars fared little better, and the X86, entered and driven by Louis Herry, owner of a local service station and garage, in his second Le Mans outing, unfortunately lost control at Maison Blanche, crashing, rolling, and disintegrating around Monsieur Herry, who was critically injured in the accident. Though emergency workers were able to extricate him from the destroyed vehicle, his injuries were too severe, and he passed while being transported to the hospital. None of the Panhard monopoles entered in that year's race, of which there were 3. There was also an X88 and 89 running under the factory's aegis, finished the race that year, with their main competitors from Deutsche Bonnet sweeping the Sports 750 class. Other monopole vehicles, some much prettier, I might add, would see better finishes across Europe throughout the rest of the 50s and early 60s, but the X86s lingered in the background, serving a couple more years as a competition model before the few remaining chassis passed into private hands to now make occasional appearances at historic events such as Le Mans Classic, where these few photos were taken. And that somewhat maudlin finish brings us to the end of another video. It wasn't my intention to make this quite such a depressing one, but there we are. For this week's call to action not featuring the 3 sacred words of YouTube,
like, comment, subscribe.
I'm not feeling very creative this week, so instead I'm going to suggest that everyone watching this video mail a potato to a random address. In the US, at least, potatoes can actually be legally posted with no further packaging or preparation. You just have to put the appropriate number of stamps on. So, make somebody's day weird. With that, it just leaves me to say, as always, thank you for your time this evening, or whenever and wherever you are watching, and to wish you all good night and a good tomorrow.